The hod, H-O-D, is a fly attributed to Sarah J. McBride. I'm tying the hod from the illustration in Mary Orvis Marbury's book, Favorite Flies and Their Histories, which was published in 1892. I'm tying this fly on a number 6 sprout hook that I have cut the eye off of. Bring my thread back up to the front of the hook. To create a blind hook, I'm tying it with claret silk, and I use claret on the Orvis flies because I don't have the old school lacquer that would have changed the color of the thread. Orvis Company tied their flies in either red or black silk. The head on the illustration in this fly is claret color or dark red, which is what would have happened to the red silk when the lacquer was applied. I am lashing on a strand of fake gut. This is a gut leader that I have created using silk thread rather than dissecting the silk moth caterpillar to get the contents of the silk gland. And just lashing it on with wax thread provides a plenty strong hold to keep that leader on this hook so that it's even fishable. I don't generally flip fish the classic flies I tie, but occasionally I have. And I could certainly attach this to a tippet and a fly line and use it. It's plenty strong. I do have to remind myself to keep waxing the thread. There are a couple of reasons for waxing silk. One is to preserve the silk because it will deteriorate on its own. And then the other is to make it sticky. That will help hold the ingredients on better. And that's particularly true when I get up to the wings and hackle. I'll bring my thread back just to the beginning of the bend. And I'm going to tie in some oval gold tinsel. This will create both the tag and the rib. I'll bring my thread up to the front of the hook. I'm going to tie in a strand of green floss, and I am tying it in, hanging out over the front of the hook, over by the leader, because I want to do a double layer of floss. J. Edson Leonard says green dubbing, but I think the illustration and also the actual fly shows a much smoother body than a dubbing body would give me. So I'm going to use floss. And I've maybe tied that in. Let me go back here. I want to tie that in a little bit further back, leave some room for the head and the wings and the hackle. And this is part of the fly time process, being willing to modify as you go or to redo where you feel that it hasn't been done quite correctly. Yeah, that gives me a little bit more space for tying in the hackle and the wing. And the heads on these Orvis flies do tend to be a little bit larger, simply because of that lashing in the leader, the gut leader, and the way things work on a blind hook. Go ahead and bring my thread back up. And I am working around both that floss and the leader as I wrap. So then I will try to keep this nice and even, touching wraps all the way down to where I have the tag and rib material tied in. And then I will bring it back up. That will make sure I have good coverage, but it'll also make the body just a little bit thicker than I'm getting with just a thread base under it. And I do realize that I'm a little bit thicker right there where I have the oval tinsel tied in. I'll see if I can't fix that as I wrap back forward. When I get to that little drop off, I just want to wrap maybe tighter, closer together wraps. Try to build the body up a little bit as I wrap forward. And I could use the rotary function of my vise, but for some reason I just kind of like the discipline of hand wrapping, and it's certainly the way the fly would have been originally tied, since they didn't have rotary vices in the late 1800s. That's really a fairly contemporary innovation in fly tying. So I'll catch that in with 3 wraps over the top of it, and then I'll pull back on it and wrap underneath. And then I'll reach in very carefully and clip just that thread or that floss. And then I'm going to wrap down. I want nice touching wraps down to create the tag, and then on top of that to come back up. So it does get to be fairly fat tag because of the oval tinsel. And then I will spiral wrap it. And I am not reverse wrapping. A couple reasons for that. One is that I don't need to, since the floss threads are really close together. I'm not going to go down between them as I spiral wrap. But also, it doesn't look from the illustration like the Orvis flies were tied with a counter wrap. So let's try to keep the same spirit anyway of the Orvis flies. I was taught and have standardized to put 3 wraps over the top of my material and then pull back on it or pull up on it and wrap tight 2 or 3 times underneath. So the first catches it in, the second secures it, and then I can clip out the waist. I'm using a brown rooster hackle, but not a contemporary genetically engineered dry fly hackle for the front hackle, and I want the hackle barbs, I can measure them around that leader, to reach about from where I tie them in back to the point of the hook. What I will do is clip off the butt end of this feather. I'm almost halfway up the feather. I just need enough to wrap in the hackle. Then I'm pulling down on the barbs at the butt end, and I'm going to give it a crew cut, which means I'm just going to cut the barbs right there at the butt end of my feather short. And that gives my thread something to grab onto as I wrap in that stem. Technically it's called a rachis. And I'll just wrap back. I can wrap up over the body a little bit, that's all right. And then I'll grab that hackle feather with my hackle pliers I have tied it so that the shiny side is up or forward. The hackle barbs are going to stand up as I wrap them, but what I will do is pull back on them and then wrap over them with the thread to get them to lay back the way a wet hackle is tied in. So although I am using a rooster feather, I'm using one with fairly long and supple barbs so that this fly will act much more like a, well, it is a wet fly, so I want it to act like a wet fly in the water. And wax my thread. That's going to help keep my thread in place. One of the things I've had to work on and learn when I'm tying on a blind hook is to keep my thread from going off the end of the hook out onto that leader. So just trying to grab all the hackle with my wet fingers, keep that leader out in front, and then I'm wrapping back over those barbs, and that will lay them down, or at least get them to bend back, and then I can grab that tip and just snap it out. I'm pretty happy with that. And I still have plenty of room up in front for the head and the wing. I'm going to go ahead right now and wrap out closer to the end of that hook so that I have a flatter surface out there when I tie the wing in and do the head. And try to split the hackle barbs on top because the wing is going to lay down between those. And this is very characteristic of the Orvis flies, that the hackle was tied in first and then the wing was tied in next. I am using wild turkey tail. I have 2 slips that I have cut the width of the hook gape. Back to back them, lay them down inside of the hackle on top of the hook. I want this tip to be out about even with the bend of the hook, maybe a little bit longer. And then I'm just going to pinch the wing feathers. Let me wax my thread again before I do that. I have to remember to do that. And I have tried, this is wax that I've made myself, and I have tried to stick some right here on my finger, but my wax is a little too sticky for that. The body temperature makes it really gummy if I do that, so I just set it on my base of my vise. So pinch those 2 wing feathers, and I'm going to grab the thread in a pinch wrap, come down, and then try not to grab any hackle while I do that, and then pinch or pull up on it and try to get it to just cinch down on itself without rolling, and then wrap a few more wraps to catch it in well, and I can look and see how I did. I think I'm going to be okay with that. Let me turn it over and see the other side. It looks pretty good. I'm a little bit not inside of the hackle barbs here, but we're going to be okay with that. Then I can pick up the butt ends and clip them out short. And then I will wrap over those butt ends, put some more wax on my thread. And then just wrap out over that head, kind of get it to square off a little bit if I can. I'm not quite sure how the Orvis tires got a nice square, unless that's more the illustration and not the actual fly. And then I'm going to throw some half hitches, so wax my thread and then twist it over itself, pull that leader through my half hitch loop, and then just catch the loop on the end of the thread and guide it in. And the first one is the hardest because it wants to flop off. The wax will help to keep it tied, and then the second and third are a little bit easier, I think. Work not to catch in any of the hackle barbs. And then because the thread is waxed, I probably could just leave it like that. But what I'm going to do is contemporize the tying here and put a drop of diluted goop. I do have lacquer, but it's clear, it won't change the color, which I could do since I am using a claret thread. But I like this diluted goop. It did darken while it's wet, but when that dries, it will come back to the claret color.